So I just finished Mega Man 2, and first things first, the strong points of the first Mega Man game, the aesthetics, both in terms of the visuals and the music, and the really good tight controls, still absolutely present in this game, almost completely unchanged in fact, which is for the better as far as I'm concerned. You know, they were good in the first one, why mess with what was already good? Big improvement, however, over the first game is the level design this time around. The levels are just a lot more engaging to play through. Enemy designs feel more dynamic and feel less like just an obnoxious thing stuck in your path. They're more interesting in general. You got like you got a lot more cases where two different types of challenge will be introduced and then they'll be combined in interesting ways. Like in Airman stage, you've got these platforms that have drills on either side of them, and those drills will come up at certain intervals, so you gotta time your jumping through. But those platforms will also spawn enemies that will come up and try to get in your way, and so it creates a situation where the enemies aren't like they're not time consuming, they're not obnoxious or anything, they don't take a long time to kill. There's just, you know, one hit'll do them. So it just creates a situation where the enemy is more of an obstacle than an enemy, really. It's just an obstacle that can be removed. And it's just something to keep your eye on, where now you've got like, you know, this deeper challenge where not only do you have to worry about platforming, but you've also got to keep an eye on the drills and the enemies and time your jumps right so that you're not going to take a hit from anything. This sort of thing is just much more prevalent in Mega Man 2 than it was in Mega Man 1. There's just a lot more points where you'll have different design elements in the level design and the enemies mixing together and creating more interesting scenarios. Metal Man stage does this by combining conveyor belts with crushers and dudes on wheels. Those are the two levels that left the most impression on me. Heatman stage actually has you dealing with enemies while also dealing with the disappearing platforms that were introduced in Mega Man 1. Although, all told, I actually bypassed that entirely since I beat Airman stage before that level, so I just rode the item number 2 across. But which is it's for those of you who are unfamiliar with the transport items, it's this flying platform that will just shoot straight forward and carry you however far. But yeah, you know, had I not bypassed it though, like I can still see that it is an interesting concept for a challenge. I just happened to not engage with it at all because I had the item that let me not do so. But yeah, just level design in general is a lot more fun and memorable this time. The levels actually feel like levels. They feel like something that was designed with a very specific vision of what each level should be. Quickman stage is also one that leaves quite an impression, what with its death lasers that you just gotta run past. That's cool because it fits with the level theme. But yeah, very much cooler stuff here than in the first game, because that was a big weakness of the first game, was the level design. Ugh. Very lackluster level design, but not so in the second game. We actually have good levels now, but the bosses are still pretty lame. They're still just a dude in a room who jumps around and shoots at you, and is pretty annoying if you don't have the item that he's weak to. But if you do have the item that he's weak to, then you can just absolutely fucking trivialize him and not even worry. And they're just not super interesting. Maybe that'll be fixed in a later game. I sure hope so, because you know we're so close. I mean, there are some interesting bosses. It's kind of neat how some of the bosses can have you can like kind of learn their pattern and manipulate them. Like I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say it was Crashman. Will jump whenever you fire a shot. So what you can do is like jump and shoot a little bit above him, and he'll jump into your shot like almost every time. Which actually allowed me to beat him late in the game during the boss rush in Wily's Fortress, when I was out of the ammo for his weakness, but I still had Mega Buster, and I you know, learned that you can trick him into jumping like that, and yeah, I used that to basically just manipulate him into a loss. But so that's kind of neat, but overall the bosses are still mostly pretty boring. The weapons are cool though. I like the Crash Bomber weapon a lot. I think it's pretty neat. The Flashman's thing, I don't recall what exactly it's called, but it was pretty lame. It just kind of freezes time and is kind of worthless outside of specific situations, because like there's one boss who's really weak to it and will take damage while time is stopped, and I think that it'll deal like half of its health bar worth of damage, which isn't bad. But the problem is that you can't attack while time is frozen, so unless you're fighting an enemy who, like that boss, will take damage while being frozen, it's just worthless. Like, it's just, well, I mean, I guess it's not completely worthless, because you can use it to, like, to force an enemy to stand still and let you get by, but it's not, I never used it for that, though, because I didn't want to use the ammo when I could just shoot the enemy. But yeah, because the problem here is kind of a limitation of these early Mega Man games. If you have the effect of a weapon or an item currently active, then you can't switch to another weapon or item. So, for example, if you shoot out a crash bomber shot, you can't switch to another weapon until it explodes. And if you use the Flashman's weapon, then you can't switch to another weapon until until the entire ammo meter for this one has been run out and time restarts again. It is a one-use item, because you just have no way of interrupting it and no way to switch to another weapon while it's going on. Yeah, it's not the best idea, but it's still kind of a neat concept, just not executed very well. But yeah, the Crash Bomber is pretty cool. The Quickman's boomerang thing is pretty fun. It's kind of interesting to have like an arcing weapon like that in a Mega Man game, in a classic Mega Man game I should play, because you tend to think of like the really early Mega Man games as having much simpler shot patterns, probably because it's hard to program more complex ones on an NES. So that was kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know why I'm beating around the bush, because the weapon that I really want to talk about is the Metal Blade, which is the greatest weapon in the history of warfare. It completely and utterly trivializes everything in this game, and you should absolutely go and fight Metal Man before anyone else, because 1, his level's not that hard, and 2, the Metal Blade is just the best weapon in the game, and the reason for that is because it can shoot in 8 directions. Any direction, just hold the D-pad in that direction while you hit the fire button, and you will shoot in that direction. Utterly trivializes everything, because so much of this game's challenge is built around the idea that you can shoot directly in front of you in most cases, and around the idea that you can almost never shoot below you. Unless you have the Metal Blade. If you have the Metal Blade, then you just don't even need to worry. You can shoot in all directions, you can hit anyone, anywhere, at any time, no worries. It is absolutely ludicrous. There were points in this game where, like, it was clearly supposed to be a scarier challenge than it was, but I had the Metal Blade so it wasn't. Like, there's a bit where there are these, like, steps leading downward, and there's an enemy at the bottom of them, and normally you're like, well, fuck, what do I do about this guy? I gotta, like, jump over him and attack him from below, or just jump over him and bypass him, I guess, but, you gotta figure out how to get past this guy, because you can't shoot downward unless you have the Metal Blade. Then you can just shoot him. You can just shoot him from the top and be fine, and not have to worry about anything. Yeah, it is crazy how much the Metal Blade trivializes just every aspect of this game, outside of a few situations where an enemy is immune to it. Like, it is ludicrous how good this weapon is. There is literally no reason not to go for Metal Man first, because it is the best weapon in the game. Which leads into another thing. A lot of the difficulty in this game is not super well balanced. All of the main 8 stages are really, really easy, especially if you have the Metal Blade. Which is, it was almost like a bit of a letdown, because Mega Man 1 was actually like a pretty meaty challenge, but Mega Man 2, like, I blasted through the first 8 stages, and then I got to Wily's Fortress and got my fucking balls rocked, because there is a massive spike in difficulty at Wily's Fortress. And it's not usually, like, it's not really, like, well-handled difficulty. I started getting my balls rocked, but it wasn't because, like, the complexity of the level design increased or anything like that. It was just, like, you had more fights in little cramped spaces, and there were more areas where you need a specific item to progress, and it's, like, the area is designed to kind of, like, use up your ammo for that item, so then you have to go back and fucking grind for it in the small cramped areas against the enemies in there, and not only does the difficulty spike really hard, but I think that the level design also takes a major hit in Wily's Fortress. which is obviously not great. In particular, in Wily's Fortress Stage 1, there's... Shit, I forgot to silence my phone. You can probably hear that. Anyway, in Wily's Fortress Stage 1, you get to the end of it, and there's, like, this segment where you got a platform, like, precision platform along these single blocks in a fucking black void while a dragon chases you and turns the entire left side of the screen into a fucking kill zone. And, like, it's not an incredibly, like... Wily Stage 1 isn't incredibly difficult up to that point, but once you get to that black void and you are being chased by the dragon on these tiny platforms, and it's basically auto-scrolling, it's fucking terrifying. It is the most stressful experience I have ever experienced in a long fucking time. Jesus, it's crazy. Like, it didn't even take me that many tries to get through it. It's just like the most terrifying thing ever, you know? And then you get to the end of it, and the boss itself is like an absolute fucking pushover, and I beat him in one try. I just died several times on the fucking horrifying void space before him. It was absolutely terrifying and shook me to my core. But then, you know, you get past it and, oh, he's not even hard. He's not even hard. It was a cool dragon design, so that was neat. But yeah, it's... In Wily Stage 2, I think, is where, like, the general difficulty of the level design starts to really tick upward, and again, usually in ways where it's just like, oh, you need a specific item, and you better have ammo for it, and also fucking cramped spaces and or spikes all over. And then Wily Stage 4 is probably, like, the worst of the difficulty spike through bullshit means, because the boss of Wily Stage 4 it's a fucking puzzle boss, where there are these turrets that are set into the walls, and they can only be destroyed with the Crash Bomber, but there are also walls blocking some of them off, which also can only be destroyed with the Crash Bomber. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and silence my phone since it does not seem to want to shut up. But yeah, you can, so you got turrets and walls which can only be destroyed with the Crash Bomber. At maximum ammo, you can fire off 7 Crash Bomber shots. There are 5 turrets and like 4 walls, and 2 of those walls are like directly covering turrets. So you have to use you have to use 2 shots to break those 2 walls. If you know exactly what you're doing and can like be really accurate, then it is possible to defeat this boss using only 6 Crash Bomber shots, but that is very difficult to do, and most people are going to need to like hit each target with a separate Crash Bomber shot, because it is actually really hard to get like this precision shot needed to take out 2 with 1 shot. So for most people, this is a boss which is like a fucking puzzle boss that has literally no room for error, because you cannot miss a single shot or you will not be able to beat it. It's really fucking bad. Also, the level is designed in such a way that you have to use like really precise use of the transport item number 1, which is a vertically floating platform, in order to get around it, which again is not fucking great. Yeah, it's a really bad boss. Like, it is one of the worst bosses I have ever seen in a Mega Man game. It is fucking terrible. The final boss isn't great either. I mentioned how the Stage 4 boss was, you know, it could only be hurt by the Crash Bomber. This is, I think, a pretty actually fucking big problem for a Mega Man boss design, because so much of the identity of the Mega Man franchise is about the fact that you have these different items and weapons at your disposal that you can use as you see fit, and some will be more or less effective against certain enemies, and you find whichever one works best and fits your playstyle, and you use that, and and you do what works for you, and you got choices. And having a boss that is just immune to every weapon type except for one completely removes all of that and just turns it into a fucking bullshit. It's fucking dumb. I hate it. Like, you know, I'm struggling to find like the word for what it is, but it sucks. You know, it's shitty. You can't build a game around the idea of having multiple weapons and being able to use whatever you want at any time and find out what works best, and then be, oh, by the way, this fucking boss can only be destroyed by this one specific weapon. Fuck you. You know, it was not great, and it is also not great when the final boss also does this. And the final boss is like this alien thing, and it can only be hurt by the bubble lead, which is actually a really fucking obnoxious design decision in this case, because the bubble lead is an item that shoots out a little bubble, which just like immediately flops onto the ground and then rolls along the ground, and it's meant to be used to hit enemies below you and on the ground like far ahead of you, you know? It's not meant to be used against enemies that are above you or flying or anything like that. The final boss is flying, and it's only vulnerable to the bubble lead. You can only hit it with the bubble lead. I mean, you can hit it with anything, but only the bubble lead will do damage. And it's constantly like flying in a little like infinity symbol pattern around the stage, so you have to wait for it to be like really low and jump into the air and hit it really precisely with the bubble lead shot, while also avoiding touching it, because it does fucking shitloads of damage if you touch it, and also it shoots occasionally, so you gotta dodge that. And god, it's a bad boss just solely because of the fact that it is only weak to the bubble lead and nothing else can hurt it. Like, if it were designed like a regular boss where you have options at your disposal, then it could very well have been a good boss, or at least a decent one, but it's fucking terrible. It's simplistic, it's just designed in a way to be as inconvenient to fight as possible. I mean, I could understand if they like just made it immune to the Metal Blade, because again, the Metal Blade fucking trivializes everything. It would absolutely trivialize a flying boss. So like, I could understand making it immune to that just for the sake of not having the player be able to come in and break it over their knee. But, you know, this is going too fucking far, guys. Making a flying boss which is only weak to a weapon that shoots downward is fucking bullshit, and I will not stand for it, and I will not allow it. Go to your room. Nah. It's not good. But still, overall, I think that Mega Man 2 is a massive improvement over Mega Man 1. It has much better level design for the most part. It's got some really cool weapons, and it still has great aesthetics and controls. It's just the boss design is still not up there. The boss design is still boring for most of it and fucking obnoxious and shitty in certain cases. And that's still not ideal. You know, it's a much better game than Mega Man, but it still has a long way to go, and I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
Nice.
Incidentally, I played it on the Mega Man Legacy Collection available on Steam, which I would recommend, with the caveat that it does not support direct input controllers by default. So if you want to play with, say, a generic USB SNES controller like I do, you're gonna have to set up fucking X360 CE, which is a program that tricks your computer into thinking that any controller is an Xbox 360 controller, because the game only supports X input. Alternatively, you could just emulate, but you know, Mega Man Legacy Collection is pretty cheap for 6 fucking games. It's not a perfect port, but it's not a terrible port. I would recommend it. I would recommend checking it out. And I would recommend playing Mega Man 2 if you are into this sort of game. But if you're really into like platform shooters like Mega Man, then definitely check it out. If you're kind of more lukewarm on them, then I'd say a hard maybe. You know, it might be worth your time depending on like how lukewarm you are. If you're not super into these sorts of games, this is not going to be the one that gets you into them, because it's not the best example of the genre.